Her only companions were the dead, and the voice of the Emperor speaking in her heart. The medic was a quiet man named Felix Harrow. Before the war claimed him, he had been studying to become a physician on one of Cadia's civilian stations. The chaos incursions had ended those dreams abruptly. His medical training proved more valuable on the battlefield than in any hospital. Harrow could perform surgery with artillery shells exploding overhead, and his hands steady as stone. He had saved lives in conditions that would have challenged the surgeons of the official Medici. His success rate was remarkable not because of his skill alone, but because he understood something that many medics never learned. Sometimes the greatest mercy was knowing when to let go. These were the soldiers who held Terror's 77 Alpha, men and women forged in the fires of the long war, tempered by losses that would have broken lesser souls. They maintained their equipment with religious devotion and performed their duties with mechanical precision. Every morning they conducted equipment inspections that would have satisfied a tech priest. Every evening they gathered for evening prayers that honored not only the emperor, but the fallen comrades whose names were inscribed on the walls of their barracks. The relay station itself was a monument to imperial engineering philosophy. Built to last millennia, it resembled a tomb more than a communications facility. The main structure was sunk 40 meters into the bedrock, surrounded by defensive positions that could withstand direct hits from orbital bombardments. The communications array rose from the center like the spire of a cathedral, its transmitters capable of punching signals through the worst warp storms. Power was provided by a geothermal tap that drew energy from the planet's molten core. Water came from ice mines dug into the polar deposits. Food was supplied by automated drop ships that arrived every 6 months with crates of corpse starch and protein bars that tasted like cardboard soaked in promethium. Life at the relay followed patterns established by Cadian military doctrine and refined by 3 years of isolation. Revi at 500 hours, followed by physical training that would have challenged Space Marine neophytes. Equipment maintenance occupied the morning hours with each soldier responsible for their personal weapons and a portion of the station's defensive systems. The afternoon was dedicated to patrol duties with teams of 2 or 3 soldiers conducting sweeps of the perimeter that extended 15 kilometers from the main facility. The evenings belonged to education and remembrance. Vin conducted tactical seminars where the squad studied historical battles and analyzed enemy weaknesses. Tyne led discussions of imperial doctrine, ensuring that every soldier understood not just what they were fighting for, but why the fight mattered. Harrow provided medical training that went beyond basic field surgery. In the event of total communications failure, each member of the squad would be capable of treating injuries that would normally require hospitalization. But it was the remembrance ceremonies that truly defined life at Tier 77 Alpha. Every night, the squad gathered in the common room to recite the names of fallen comrades. The list was long. It began with friends lost during their first deployment to the agri-world of Thanus Prime, where orc raiders had turned fertile farmland into a corral house. It continued through the brutal urban warfare on Hive-world Morax, where they had fought chaos cultists in tunnels filled with toxic gas and the screams of the damned. The names accumulated like sediment, layer upon layer of loss that formed the foundation of their identity. They were Cadian. They endured. The first sign that their isolation was ending came on a Tuesday morning during the 3rd year of their deployment. Voss was conducting a routine patrol of Sector 7 when her Vox unit crackled with an automated distress signal. The transmission was brief and heavily corrupted by interference, but the message was unmistakable. An Imperial vessel was requesting emergency assistance, approximately 200 kilometers to the northwest. The signal repeated every 30 seconds, suggesting that the ship's crew was either dead or incapacitated. Vin made the decision to investigate without consulting higher command. This was partly due to Imperial doctrine, which required all available forces to assist in rescue operations, but it was also a recognition of reality. The nearest Imperial base was 6 months away by conventional transport. If there were survivors aboard the downed vessel, they would be dead long before reinforcements arrived. The 47th Cadian shock troops were the only help available. The journey to the crash site took 2 days across terrain that would have challenged an experienced mountaineer. Colossus Prime was a world of extremes. During the day, temperatures could reach levels that would cook unprotected flesh in minutes. The squad traveled during the dawn and dusk hours when the temperature was merely hostile rather than lethal. They moved in standard patrol formation with Dini and Voss serving as advanced scouts, while the main body followed at a distance of 500 meters. The crashed vessel revealed itself gradually like a corpse emerging from shallow water. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a dark smudge against the horizon. As they drew closer, details resolved into a picture of catastrophic destruction. The ship had been a light cruiser of ancient design, its hull bearing the scars of weapons fire that had penetrated void shields and armor plating. The impact had driven the vessel nearly 100 meters into the planet's surface, creating a crater that resembled a meteor strike. Emergency beacons were still functioning, powered by backup generators that would continue operating for weeks without maintenance. But there was no response to Vox communications, no signs of life among the twisted wreckage. Varen ordered a careful approach with weapons ready and eyes scanning for any indication of survivors or threats. What they found instead was something far worse than death. The ship's crew had not died in the crash. They had been changed. The bodies scattered throughout the wreckage showed signs of mutation that could only have come from prolonged exposure to chaos influence. Some had grown additional limbs that ended in claws or tentacles. Others had developed sensory organs in impossible places, eyes sprouting from shoulders or mouths opening in the center of chest cavities. The changes followed no rational pattern, as if reality itself had become fluid and malleable around the vessel. In the captain's quarters, they found a log book that told the story of the ship's final voyage. The vessel had been traveling through the maelstrom, carrying a cargo manifest that had been classified at the highest levels of Imperial security. 3 weeks into the journey, the ship had encountered warp storms of unprecedented severity. The Gellerfield had flickered, allowing the merest touch of the Imperium to caress the vessel's hull. That touch had been enough. The mutations had begun slowly. A crewman reported strange dreams. Another complained of voices whispering in languages that had never been spoken by human tongues. Within days, the changes had become physical. Skin began to shift and flow like water. Bones reformed themselves into new configurations. The ship's commander had tried to maintain order. But how do you discipline crew members who no longer possess human vocal cords? The final entry in the logbook was a single line written in a hand that shook with madness or terror. The Emperor protects, but from what? Harrow examined the bodies with the clinical detachment of a trained medic. His conclusion was unambiguous. The mutations were not random, but followed patterns that suggested intelligent design. Something had been reshaping these people according to a plan that human minds could not comprehend. The process had been ongoing for months, perhaps years before the crash. The vessel had become a laboratory where the laws of biology were rewritten according to the whims of entities that existed beyond the boundaries of sanity. More disturbing was his secondary finding. The mutations were still active. Despite the fact that the crew had been dead for weeks, their bodies continued to change. Flesh rippled with motion that had nothing to do with decomposition. New growths emerged from corpses that should have been reduced to bone and dry tissue. Whatever force had claimed the ship remained present, working its will upon matter that no longer possessed the spark of life. Vin ordered an immediate withdrawal. The ship and its cargo were beyond salvation. The only course of action was to return to the relay station and report their findings to higher command. With luck, an Inquisition team could be dispatched to contain the corruption before it spread beyond the crash site. Such hope proved to be optimistic. The corruption had already found them. DN was the first to show symptoms. During the journey back to Turchase 77 Alpha, he began complaining of headaches that seemed to originate behind his eyes. The pain was accompanied by visual disturbances that he described as seeing things that weren't there. Shapes moving at the periphery of his vision, shadows that fell in directions that defied the position of the sun, colors that had no names in any human language. Harrow administered standard painkillers and ordered additional rest periods, but the symptoms persisted. By the time they reached the relay station, Dean was reporting auditory hallucinations, voices calling his name from empty corridors, music that seemed to come from inside his skull, whispers in languages that sounded almost familiar, but carried meanings that made his soul ache with longing for things he could not identify. The medical examination revealed nothing abnormal. His reflexes remained sharp. Blood tests showed no indication of infection or toxicity. Yet something was clearly wrong. The man who had once been capable of threading bullets through needle eyes now struggled to hit targets at point-blank range. His legendary marksmanship, honed through decades of constant practice, had abandoned him without explanation. Vin made the decision to quarantine Dean in the station's medical bay. This was a precaution born of experience, rather than protocol. The 47th Cadian shock troops had encountered chaos corruption before. They understood that the enemy's greatest weapon was not firepower or numbers, but the ability to turn humanity's strengths against itself. A single corrupted individual could destroy a regiment more effectively than a company of space marines. But quarantine measures proved inadequate when the corruption existed not in flesh, but in perception itself. On the third night after their return, Corvin reported equipment malfunctions in the communications array. Routine diagnostic procedures revealed nothing wrong with the hardware, yet the transmitters continued to emit signals that bore no resemblance to standard Imperial codes. The emissions were complex patterns of static that seemed to contain hidden meanings, like messages encoded in the language of dying stars. Technical analysis provided no answers. The equipment functioned perfectly according to every test that Corvin could devise. Power consumption remained within normal parameters. Signal strength was optimal. Yet the nature of the transmissions had changed in ways that defied rational explanation. Instead of the crisp digital signals required for interstellar communication, the array was broadcasting analog patterns that resembled nothing so much as the electroencephalographic readings of a dreaming mind. Vin ordered the communications array to be shut down until the malfunction could be identified and corrected. This decision proved to be a mistake. Without the constant background hum of the transmitters, the silence at Tertius 77 Alpha became absolute. In that silence, they began to hear things that should not have existed. The sounds came at night when the station's environmental systems reduced their activity to conserve power. Footsteps in empty corridors, conversations in rooms that had been unoccupied for hours, the whisper of pages turning in books that contained no words. These auditory phenomena were not random, but followed patterns that suggested purpose. They seemed to be searching for something, methodically exploring every corner of the facility, like an invisible presence conducting a thorough inspection. Fane volunteered to investigate. As second in command, he considered it his duty to confront threats that might be beyond the capability of his subordinates. Armed with a handheld Auspex and a compactless pistol, he began nocturnal patrols of the station's interior spaces. The readings he collected were disturbing but inconclusive. The Auspex detected motion in areas where nothing visible moved. Temperature fluctuations occurred without apparent cause. Electromagnetic fields shifted according to patterns that bore no relationship to the station's electrical systems. All current duties were to be transferred to replacement personnel within 72 hours. The orders were signed by authorities she had never heard of using seals that carried power beyond anything in her experience. This was not a routine military transfer, but something far more significant. They were being summoned by individuals who operated in shadows beyond the reach of normal Imperial hierarchy. As they prepared for departure, Harrow made a final discovery that cast their situation in new light. Hidden within their medical files were genetic markers that should not have existed in baseline human DNA. Sequences that resembled coding rather than natural evolution. Patterns that suggested their modifications had been planned and implemented by intelligence that possessed understanding of human biology far exceeding Imperial medical science. They were no longer merely enhanced soldiers, but prototypes of something new, living experiments designed to test the limits of human potential. The question was whether they had been improved for their own benefit or to serve purposes that existed beyond their comprehension. The answer would come soon enough. The galaxy was changing in ways that would require humanity to evolve or face extinction. Ancient threats were stirring in the void between stars, preparing to reclaim territories they had abandoned eons ago. The war that was coming would be fought not between armies, but between different concepts of what life itself should become. And in the darkness between sleeping and waking, Vin could hear something calling her name, not with the voice of the dead or the whispers of corruption, but with words,